This is a great honor and a joy for me to be up here introducing Loretta Lynch. We go back a long way. We are classmates at Harvard Law School with my husband. I went to New York with her, and we were young associates at Cahill Gordon Rindell there in New York for a time. She lasted longer than I did. She is the godmother to our child. So this is a wonderful occasion for me. This has been a wonderful year watching her come to her position and everything that we hope for her come to fruition. I know you want to talk to her, so I could reminisce forever, but I will not do that. I will give her official introduction and give you an idea of the person, the wonderful person that you are looking at and that you will have an opportunity to speak with later on today. Loretta E. Lynch was sworn in as the 83rd Attorney General of the United States by Vice President Joe Biden on April 27, 2015. President Barack Obama announced his intention to nominate Ms. Lynch on November 8, 2014. Ms. Lynch received her A.B. cum laude from Harvard College in 1981 and her J.D. from Harvard Law School in 1984. I was hoping they wouldn't mention that. In 1990, after a period in private practice, Ms. Lynch joined the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, located in Brooklyn, New York, the city she considers her adopted home. There, she forged an impressive career prosecuting cases involving narcotics, violent crimes, public corruption, and civil rights. In one notable instance, she served on the prosecution team in the high-profile civil rights case of Abner Louima, the Haitian immigrant who was sexually assaulted by uniformed police officers in a Brooklyn police precinct in 1997. In 1999, President Clinton appointed her to the lead office as United States Attorney, a post she held until 2001. In 2002, she joined Hogan & Hartson, LLP, now Hogan Lovells, as a partner in the firm's New York office. While in private practice, Ms. Lynch performed extensive pro bono work in the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, established to prosecute those responsible for human rights violations in 1994 genocide in that country. As special counsel to the tribunal, she was responsible for investigating allegations of witness tampering and false testimony. In 2010, President Obama asked Ms. Lynch to resume her leadership of the United States Attorney's Office in Brooklyn. Under her direction, the office successfully prosecuted numerous corrupt public officials, terrorists, cyber criminals, and human traffickers, among other important cases. Ms. Lynch is the daughter of Lorenzo and Lorene Lynch of Durham, North Carolina, a retired minister and librarian, whose commitment to justice and public service has been the inspiration of her life's work. Ms. Lynch enjoys spending her free time with her husband, Stephen Hargrove, and their 2 children. This is going to be great. Welcome back, Loretta.
Thank you so much, Annette. Make sure that my mic is on. I actually am not going to give you a long prepared speech this afternoon because I'm tremendously honored to be joined by Professor Steiker here on the stage, and she and I are going to have a conversation and then take questions from you, because I really want to hear what this generation of Harvard students and Harvard leadership are thinking. As Professor Gordon Reed mentioned, she and I were students here in the 80s, very, very different time then. But I think that what probably has not changed from now until then is that what you will probably learn the most from are the people who are seated around you in this room today. There are wonderful professors here. There are great courses. There are wonderful opportunities. But the people with whom you are going through this particular adventure are going to help you open up your mind, open up your heart, expose you to new backgrounds, new cultures. And my only advice to you is to drink it all in, because it's great. It's absolutely great. So I'm actually here today in the Boston area as part of a follow-up to what I think was one of the president's best speeches ever, last night's State of the Union address. So for those of you who saw the speech, you know he outlined really a series of challenges for for our country and for all of our generations, not just for his last year in office, but for years to come. But he also talked about some of the specific issues that he is still determined to work on even in this last year of the administration, particularly criminal justice reform, including reentry. And those are some of the issues that I am incredibly privileged to work on with him as part of the Department of Justice's efforts to frankly make sure that the sheltering arm of our Constitution and the sheltering arm of justice covers all of our citizens, covers everybody under that ambit. We spend a great deal of time focusing not just on the core mission that we do in terms of prosecution and litigation of cases, but also, just as important, how do we prevent people from interacting with the criminal justice system? How do we stop them from making the mistakes that lead them into our system? And then, when individuals have, in fact, served their debt to society, how do we make sure that they have a way to go home to their families, to go home to their communities, to become productive citizens, how do we give them tools that maybe they didn't have before? Because when we take in people, as we do, and when we release people, as we do release 600,000 federal inmates at least come out every year, and certainly 1 million or more if you add in the state system, we feel that we have an obligation to essentially care for those individuals who are in our charge at that time as well. And it's been one of the challenges of our time, I think, as we have looked, and I mean, when I say we, I mean all of us in the administration, have looked at the issue of the criminal justice system in a larger way than simply prosecutions, because so much happens before a case file ever hits your desk. And the Department of Justice has the opportunity to work on some tremendously exciting issues. And I will tell you, it's some of the most exciting and fun stuff that I get to do as Attorney General. Although actually, so far, the most fun thing was attending the State of the Union address last night. I will tell you that. That was the most fun thing ever so far. But I have the privilege of working for and with a president, also a graduate of this institution, who cares deeply about the American people, who cares deeply about making sure that everyone has an opportunity, that the promise of America is available to people no matter where they live, where they come from, what they look like, and more importantly, whom they love, which has been a tremendous, tremendous gain for those of us who've worked on those issues for a long time. And when it comes to criminal justice reform, the department has spent a lot of time trying to expand the perspective of how we look at these issues. My predecessor, Eric Holder, initiated the Smart on Crime program, where we took a look at how we were prosecuting. Again, very, very important cases, but looking at, with the benefit of time and the ability to look back over the consequences of our actions, to look and see, were we in fact making the most effective choices as we prosecute narcotics offenses? Now, as many of you know, we're dealing with a system that still does have mandatory minimums as part of it. It has mandatory sentencing enhancements as part of it. And this came about, I would say, actually probably right before I became a young prosecutor, the late 80s and early 90s, at a time when I think people were genuinely struggling with what to do, with what they saw were the incredibly negative impacts and consequences of narcotics crime and violence that came with it on communities. But in trying to essentially be tough on crime, what we have seen is that those actions have had the consequences of not just removing individuals from communities, but they removed individuals from families. They removed individuals from connections to other people, and they removed individuals from opportunities. And so how do we, and what are our responsibilities for those of us who work in the justice system to in fact consider that as we determine how to prosecute? And hence, Smart on Crime, which is also being tough on crime, but is a way to look at it in terms of trying to get back to focusing on every individual defendant and focusing on prevention and also reentry and recidivism programs. So I was here today, this morning, at the Suffolk County House of Corrections looking at 3 outstanding reentry and recidivism programs. The Boston Reentry Initiative, another program called CGI, the name of which I will forget, so I'll give you the initials, and CREW, which is focused on female inmates, another population that is tremendously underserved by our current system. These particular programs focus on life skills as well as job skills. And I spent some time talking with inmates who are currently in these programs, as well as some former inmates who came back and shared their experiences as to what led to a successful reentry for them. And the comments from everyone were strikingly similar. Obviously, every individual has to want to make a change and has to want to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented, be they in an incarceratory setting or elsewhere. There has to be that commitment. But there also has to be a recognition that many individuals need the kind of life skills that they didn't get before they were incarcerated in order to take advantage of a lot of educational programs. And people spoke movingly about being involved in parenting classes and realizing that even though they were away from their children, they could still be a parent to their children. This is huge. This is huge because when we look at the results of incarceration on families, particularly when women are incarcerated, we see long-term collateral consequences that can go through generations. And so to recognize that, in fact, the family connection can be one of the strongest and best things that an individual can have as they move through prison and then through reentry is a very, very important thing. And so the Department of Justice is looking to support that. Through our grant programs, we support a number of reentry programs. Also, there were job training programs discussed this morning. Inmates who are learning skills that will gain them actual certifications and apprenticeships when they leave. They walk out literally able to be employed, which is tremendously huge when you think of the barriers to employment that exist for people with criminal records, even minor ones. But I thought what was most moving about the people that I met this morning was the fact that a number of them said that all of these programs, not just the specific programs, but the fact that someone cared enough to reach out to them and invest in them, made them for the first time focus on who they really were as people, and what they had to contribute as people, as parents, as siblings, as family members and members of a community. And when you think about it, all of us, no matter where we're from, no matter where we've landed, whether we are at Harvard Law School or whether we are working or whether we in fact may be behind bars, all of us need a helping hand at some time or another. All of us have gotten to where we are because someone saw something in us and gave us that hand and gave us that help. And so to be able to use the resources of the Department of Justice to expand on that and provide support for these programs is tremendously, tremendously gratifying. I'm here with my outstanding staff and team at Office of Justice Programs, as well as my own staff on the Attorney General's office who put all programs like this together. Believe me, it's not me, it's them. They make me look good every time, and I thank them for that. I'm here with Daryl Atkinson, who is our Second Chance Fellow, as a young lawyer who's working with our grant programs focused on reentry and recidivism. And he's working with us because we were looking for someone who had not just a legal perspective, but the perspective of someone who'd been incarcerated and who had in fact left that particular situation and gone on to join not just the legal profession, but to join the Department of Justice. And so I'm tremendously proud that Daryl is here as well. So he's just here. So what I would say to all of you is that this is a tremendously important issue. In fact, I think that criminal justice reform and sentencing reform are a transformative issue of our generation. I'm tremendously happy that we seem to have bipartisan support in Congress for making some real changes. And frankly, even with the rancor that we've had over the last year, I think that support still exists. I think that people are still committed to this issue, and they come at it from a variety of perspectives. They come at it for a variety of reasons. But we're all, for whatever reason, at this very, very special, very unique moment in time, poised to look at what can we do to make our criminal justice system not just more efficient, but more fair. What can we do to make sure that people are connected to the processes that keep them safe? And what can we do to make sure that everyone who touches the criminal justice system knows and understands that at the end of that, they will come out and they will again be able to truly go home. So I thank you for your attention. As I said, I'm not going to give a long speech. I did want to talk about why I was here today and urge you, as you consider how to best manage your legal career and your skills, to think about your efforts and how you can contribute. Maybe not being a federal prosecutor, but in terms of public service, in terms of helping young businesses, in terms of helping previously incarcerated individuals, in terms of helping families. It's a wonderful adjunct to whatever career you choose, and frankly, it's been the best career that I could have chosen. It's because of the people and the influences that I had, not just throughout my life, but also here at Harvard Law School, the friends that I've made who've supported me through all my choices. I think when I went off to become a prosecutor, I think Annette was sort of like, where are you going to go with this? But all those years ago when we were sitting together at our law firm, wondering, essentially, this is interesting, it's challenging, it's great, but where is the thing that challenges us? Where is the thing that motivates us? Where is the thing that touches our heart? You're at a place and you have opportunities to find that thing. So search for it, look for it. It may not be the first thing that you find, but you will find it and you will know. It's the thing that will get you up in the morning. It's the thing that you do all day, all night, all week, and you don't feel tired. It's the project that you do when you would say, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. It's different for everyone, but it's out there for everyone. So thank you so much for welcoming me back to Harvard, and I look forward to sitting down and talking with each and every one of you through Professor Steiker here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Let me add my welcome on behalf of the school. Dean Martha Minow is out of the country, and she asked me particularly to convey her welcome to have you back here. I will say that the formally correct way to address the Attorney General, I have learned, is Madam Attorney General. Madam Attorney General Loretta Lynch has asked me, so I'm not being presumptuous here, to call her Loretta. I just wanted to say that so that you wouldn't all collectively gasp when I do that. Loretta, it's so thrilling to have you back here. And that was a wonderful introduction to some of the work that's brought you here. I wanted to ask you first to reflect a little bit about your own career path, because as Annette told us, you've had this wonderful career as a federal prosecutor in all kinds of roles, and yet now you're the Attorney General. And I know that many of our students want to work for the federal government, some in federal prosecution, some in defense and state prosecution and defense. And I thought maybe you could reflect a little about your own career path, what you found satisfying most along the way, those moments when you thought, and they're paying me too. I think that's the best career advice that I've heard. And the new challenges of the position of Attorney General and the problems and perspectives that role has brought you.
Sure. Well, I think I started out, I left law school like so many of you will leave, needing to pay off some loans, quite frankly, and also wanting to do interesting work, wanting to do challenging work, and not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do. Harvard is a great place to explore a lot of things. I was able to do, my moot court was through a prosecution clinic, so I actually had a mock trial for my moot court project, and I thought, I really love this.
I did that too.
How do you get to do this all the time? And I worked on the Legal Aid Bureau, and so I was able to meet people who really brought to life a lot of the problems that we talked about in class. So I would urge you to take advantage of those opportunities because they can give you an insight into what you like, and more importantly, what you don't like, because everything's not for everyone. I went to New York. I went to a large firm because it did a lot of First Amendment law. Initially, I thought that I might want to focus on communications law, and went there and realized that a lot of different practice areas, sort of are the same when you are in the library reviewing documents or when you are writing briefs and all. And I was one of the people that, at least in terms of the group of my friends, I enjoyed my time at a law firm because I sort of viewed it as postgraduate work. I learned a lot. I learned how to write. I thought I knew from leaving here, but I wrote like a law student, rather lengthy. And you all know what I mean. I learned how to write professionally. I learned how to work with people. I learned how to work with difficult people, which is a skill. And I sort of learned different perspectives on problems and saw some really, really interesting cases. But for me, I always remembered that I really enjoyed being in court, wanted that opportunity, and so began looking for those opportunities. And I think for me also, I was able to be happy in a large law firm when a lot of my colleagues weren't, because I really did view it as a temporary situation. I thought I'm here to learn a lot and to contribute a lot, but I viewed it very much as I was making a contribution to them and I was getting something in return as well in terms of the education and training, and then realized I was ready to move on. And that moved on before I did into public service, into the Department of Corrections, as I recall. And I had friends who went to the DA's office, and I had friends who went to the U.S. Attorney's office, and I thought that the federal prosecutor's world, for me, I thought was interesting and challenging, and the types of cases that they were working on were very interesting and challenging. So I always looked for something that that sort of connected with me, things that resonated. And I will tell you, sometimes it's hard to leave the accepted path, particularly when you come from a place like Harvard Law School, because people will have expectations of what you should and shouldn't do. Your own family sometimes will have those expectations. And I remember vividly the night before I started as a federal prosecutor, my dad called me up and he said, "You know, I bet if you called your law firm, they'd take you back." And I think that for a lot of people, particularly when they've invested so much in you being here, and they want the best for you. They want you to be happy. They want you to do well. They want you to have a good life. You know, sometimes a lot of that gets bound up in fear of the unknown. And if you leave that accepted path, because it really wasn't as accepted to go into public service then as it is now. Harvard's been a strong supporter for years, but not every law school is. And so I think when you leave that path, you do get a lot of people doubting your vision and doubting what you want to do. And I remember another friend's mother said to me, "I don't know about this working for the federal government thing. You know, it's like working for the post office." And I thought, well, I don't think it's going to be quite like that. But so people will, in all well-meaning ways, try and keep you on sort of a traditional path. But if you think that there's something else out there that calls you, and that's why the thing to do is to explore as much as you can now, then you owe it to yourself to try it. And if it doesn't work out, you do something else. That's what I realized early on. When you're young, you don't think you have that opportunity. You think, oh my God, I got to pick the right job right now. I got to know right now what I want to do. No, you don't. No, you don't. Find something that you love to do. Find something that challenges you, and give it your whole heart. And if it resonates with you, things will open up in that field for you. And if it doesn't, it just means it isn't for you. That's all that means. And you go on and you do something else.
That's great. So now you're the Attorney General. You get to go to the State of the Union. That is very cool. We saw you last night. We're like, hey, look, there she is. So what else is cool about being the Attorney General? So, you know, how is this different from, you know, you've had many important roles as a federal prosecutor. How does the perspective change when you're Attorney General?
Well, I think when I started out as a federal prosecutor, I was, of course, very focused on my cases. Right. And they were the most important cases in the world, and I didn't know why everyone else didn't see them that way. But you know, you get older and you gain more perspective, I should say. And I view it really as a culmination of everything that I've learned in my different positions. When I was a young prosecutor, in the 1990s, we were struggling with how to deal with drugs and the violence, particularly in New York. We had an influx of particularly narcotics traffickers from the Caribbean, particularly the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, and we had some situations in New York where there was incredible violence on the streets, and so that was very eye-opening to me. But I saw the struggle to deal with that, but I also saw, I think, what that situation did to the families, not just of victims, but of defendants. So I think early on I was able to see that what I was doing really had ramifications far beyond a single case. And that, I think, came from the other prosecutors who taught me, who worked with me, who were very involved in the community. So that was something that I think I've taken with me to this position, to this job, and that hasn't changed. And so it's actually very cool to be able to focus on a national level on some of the issues that I saw when I was a young prosecutor. I also spent a lot of time when I was a young prosecutor working with victims of crime and seeing the impact there, and so to be able to provide help and support there as well. One of the things that I'm focused on tremendously as Attorney General, in addition to criminal justice reform and those efforts, is I spend a lot of time working on the issue of police and community relations. And that does grow out of my work in the 90s on the Louima case and beyond, and also in different communities, and seeing communities, particularly communities of color, really want police help and police support, but not know how to bridge the gap that was there. And sometimes seeing very successful collaborations between the police and the community. And so seeing the different ways in which people had those interactions has been very instructive. And so one of the best things that I think I'm able to do and that I enjoy the most is working on that issue, trying to highlight not just the issue, not just the situations where there's been a breakdown in trust, because we have to have some very important discussions about that on a whole host of levels, but also trying to find the situations where people, particularly community members, have been able to craft a positive relationship and use those as examples and share them with other communities.
That's fascinating. I mean, this has been the year of policing and police reform and calls for accountability for places where police-community relations have broken down. And I know that the Department of Justice has done a lot of important work on that, including in Ferguson. Missouri, you say, well, let's also look for models of places where these relationships have worked. Can you think of some examples that we could turn to?
Sure. I actually did a 6-city policing tour last year in 2015, and I chose cities that had had a very challenged relationship between the police and the community, either coming from a shooting or just a history of negative relationships, or whether the Department of Justice had to intervene with a lawsuit or with collaborative reform, or just even with the threat of a lawsuit. And so there are many, many different ways of getting people to the table. I went to Seattle, I went to Cleveland, I went to, I went to Richmond, California, I went to Birmingham, Alabama, and I think there's 2 other cities that I'm blanking on now. I know I was in Pittsburgh as well. And so these are not perfect situations, but there's situations where, in particular, the community and the police made a commitment to improving their situation because of a recognition that they had more in common than they had dividing them. That is to say, a connection to the community and a desire to see things improve. But in all of those situations, there often was a great deal of pressure, either from the Department of Justice or other parties, to get people to the table. But if the commitment is there, if in fact you have people who, again, I'm not going to say that this is an easy thing to do, but if the commitment is there and people are willing to look at the hard issues and accept responsibility, particularly on both sides of the divide. I mean, I've sat in community meetings on this issue in different towns and had community members say to me, we had to acknowledge our own responsibility for why the relationship was so bad. And I've had law enforcement say to me, we've had to acknowledge our responsibility in why this relationship was so bad, and the fact that we have to make positive changes. And I've had veteran police chiefs say, I had to totally revamp my police department in order to get the people on board committed to responsible community policing. But when you get that, and you get officers who say, I used to think policing was all about numbers and racking up arrests, and now I realize it's about helping build a community and knowing who people are, they've reconnected to policing. They've reconnected to why they became a cop in the first place. And you get community members who say, now I know who to call, now I know who to talk to. And again, not a perfect situation. Situations where incidents will still occur, but there is at least a bridge to communication and a way to have a discussion about something and come to resolution that a lot of cities don't have. And so we're trying to use those as examples because they, in fact, were where Ferguson is and where Baltimore recently was. Those cities were in exactly the same places, and they've managed to pull back, but it was a very determined effort.
Well, speaking of commitment, this is a very exciting time in terms of criminal justice reform, not just with regard to policing, but more generally. And, you know, the president talked about it yesterday. You could see in the chamber yesterday that it's an issue that there is broad-based consensus that we need reform about. What would you like to see? What can we expect this year to bring? What would you like to see happen in this upcoming year, day after the State of the Union criminal justice reform?
Well, you know, this is an issue on which there has been broad bipartisan support for criminal justice reform in both the House and the Senate. It's one of the few issues that have remained consistently bipartisan and have had very productive discusussions. And so I know that some people may be surprised to hear that there can be productive discussions on Capitol Hill. But it in fact has been very helpful to have different groups express their views, to have different members of Congress express their views and their concerns, and to have people raise different rationales for why this is important to them. And a lot of what we're doing is looking at different state examples of how many states, North Carolina, my home state, Georgia, Texas, have initiated some reforms and have seen reductions in violent crime as well as reductions in the cost outlays for the prison system. And so when you see that it can be done, it definitely helps spur the debate as well. There's a number of bills pending now, a number of discussions, but they all generally focus on reducing or limiting mandatory minimums even further. I'm not sure where that's going to land because there's a lot of debates and trade-offs there. They also focus on making a lot of recent changes retroactive. Recently, the narcotics guidelines were lowered several levels, and those changes were made retroactive so that defendants could take advantage of that as well. Some of the changes in reducing the mandatory minimums, the point is to make them retroactive. Again, because if you're talking about an issue of fundamental fairness, you have to look at it from a broader perspective of just changing the law for those people caught up in it going forward. And also, again, focusing on prevention and reentry and recidivism programs, particularly strengthening the efforts within the federal prison system, our Bureau of Prisons, for both educational exercises and job training and other life skills training as well. So those are the three main components that I'm very, very hopeful are going to move forward, and I think there is a consensus for it. So frankly, I hope to see something in the spring. I can't predict, obviously, what Congress will do, but the discussions are continuing, they're ongoing, and so I think that we will get some relief there as well. I would note that earlier in the administration there were some congressional changes to lower the crack cocaine ratio. Many people wanted it to 1-to-1. It didn't come down, it was at 100-to-1, it came down. So in many people's view, it's still not where it should be. That I don't think is likely to be raised again in terms of the remaining congressional year, but people are still looking at that issue and focusing on that issue as well. So the current reforms are focused on those three main areas. And they could have some tremendously beneficial effects, not just budget-wise, I think, but human capital-wise.
Those are all really interesting ideas, and one way that the Justice Department works on these ideas, I think it'd just be interesting to hear you talk about this a little bit more, is obviously you have the federal government of the sort of 2.3 million people who are incarcerated in the United States. The 0.3, roughly speaking, is the federal piece, but you got 2 million people in state prisons and jails. So you're here with the Office of Justice Programs. The Justice Department does a lot of work with states, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that your ability to affect nationwide state-level reform as well as federal reform.
We do, through our Office of Justice Programs, which is our main grant-making vehicle, we do support a lot of state efforts in the criminal justice issue, particularly in terms of reentry. And also victim services and victim support issues as well. We also support a lot of local law enforcement initiatives, and we're always looking for programs that can show us essentially something innovative, something creative, something effective by way of a job training program, or by way, frankly, of helping a state keep better records on inmates and how well they're doing in certain types of programs. It's as varied as that in terms of what we do. And it's a little-known part of the department, but one that I am tremendously proud of, because the work that they do, and they never have enough money, they never have enough resources, but they've got dedication and they've got heart. And they live this every day, and I'm tremendously proud of what they do because they make a real difference in states. So we provide states different resources for different programs. We also try and also use our own facilities as a research tool as well. We recently just completed a study on restrictive housing, or solitary confinement, that is, in the federal prison system, and I provided that to the president recently. And so we're going to be issuing a report on that we hope will be helpful as states look at this issue also of how to use that particular tool in their incarceration system. So there are a number of ways in which we interact with the states. But we also look to the states and we try and highlight the ones, as I mentioned. Texas, for example, has frankly been a leader in criminal justice reform because of budget issues primarily. And certainly with state budgets being extremely tight, people are looking to ways to limit the use, or to limit the costs of incarcerating individuals. And the cost of incarcerating an individual for, let's say, even 5 to 6 years is frankly much, much more than the cost of educating an individual for grades 1 through 12. And so states are realizing that, and they're recognizing that it's unsustainable, but they're also recognizing that they're losing people. And they're losing people who could be contributing to their economy. And so when you see states looking at their own facilities as laboratories and coming up with programs that reduce sentences, focus on prevention, and focus on reentry, and crime also goes down, you really see you have a winning combination.
That's great. I'm going to ask one last question because the Attorney General needs to leave at 4, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. The last question I have is, there are many students here who are interested in criminal justice, which is great. What advice would you give to a young law student who wants to make a difference in this area? What should they do?
Well, I think you should explore many different options. I think you should try different things. If this is your area of interest, look for that in terms of your internships here on campus and your summer positions. But even if you end up doing something else for the summer, there are many, many different ways to get involved with this issue. If you end up working for a law firm because that also interests you, there are pro bono opportunities to represent individuals who are on appeal, for example. I know New York had a system whereby you could represent, you could also do legal aid work on a pro bono basis, but you could also work for the district attorney and help them with appellate work. So there are all kinds of opportunities out there to explore the many, many different avenues of criminal justice. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a defense lawyer when I was in private practice. Also a very, very important role. Both are equally important in keeping our system fair and in making sure that everyone who goes through the system gets the benefit of our entire system of justice. But that's not for everybody. I think people sometimes have a view that they have to be a prosecutor, they have to be a defense lawyer in order to effectuate change. But there's so many other things you can do as well. As I mentioned, the research arm of the Department of Justice, our grant-making arm of the Department of Justice, the policy work that we do, frankly, I think will have long-term effects on the safety and health and well-being, but hopefully also the fairness of our overall system. So what I would say is if this is your area of interest, or even if it isn't, explore it. Try it. Either work for the summer, do pro bono work in the area, talk to people who are in this position. You will find, I will tell you that trial lawyers love to talk, number one, and love to talk about their cases. And you can get an idea of whether that connects with you or not. And you really don't know until you've had some sort of brush with this issue, if it is for you and if it connects with you. And I think what you'll find is that it can be an incredibly rewarding way to work in one of the most challenging areas of the law. And so whatever you end up doing, what I would say is, as I mentioned before, do it with your whole heart. Give it all of yourself, and you will definitely find that thing in this great profession of ours that touches you and connects with you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Do we have a microphone that's going to be handed around? Because we have questions right here in the front.
Oh, here we go.
Good afternoon. My name is China Boak Terrell, and I'm actually at the Harvard Kennedy School, but criminal justice issues are very, very dear to me because I care about city management, and no one wants to live in a city that's unsafe. So my question is, what are the challenges and opportunities associated with making housing assistance available to those with drug convictions, number one? And then number two, from your viewpoint, is there capacity within the pro bono, legal pro bono community to actually help those who are incarcerated to take advantage of the retroactive provisions if the 2015 bills become law? So those two questions.
Well, certainly, as I mentioned before, I chair the Federal Interagency Reentry Council. And one of the things that we explore are exactly those issues about barriers to public housing for those, not just with drug convictions, but with felony convictions in general. There's a perception that there's an automatic bar to living in public housing with a felony conviction. And there's actually, it really depends upon the type of conviction and also the type of public housing that it is. And so one of the things that HUD has done is issue literally a very clear and concise fact sheet explaining this so that people know that they aren't necessarily barred from that. One of the challenges, however, is when people come out and if their family lives in public housing, they don't have anywhere to go except with their family. And so, you know, can you in fact find some accommodation for that person? That's a tremendous challenge as well. I think that depending upon the nature of someone's post-release conditions of probation or state parole, they often have limitations on whom they can associate with. And so they may not be able to have they certainly may not be able to have other criminal associations come to public housing as well. There's also a fear and a concern that even if the individual were to come and stay temporarily, is their family in danger of losing their public housing spot or berth as it is? So there's a whole host of challenges there, and I think HUD is very committed to working through them. And I don't have the fact sheet with me. I wish I did, because it's something that I really would like to pass out. But we can get you that information if you want to reach out to my staff as well, because there are challenges, but they're definitely being worked on. They're definitely being reviewed. And I'm sorry, I forgot your second question.
To help with the incarcerated persons actually take advantage of the retroactive provisions if they come along.
So we have been reaching out to the private bar to work on that. I think that it frankly tends to best be done through things like law school clinics or legal aid societies, because they tend to have the connections already with incarcerated individuals, and those are the two main systems that I'm aware of. And so it's definitely is a great clinic project. But the real way we're trying to do this, though, is that, for example, when retroactivity provisions become law, the Bureau of Prisons has everyone's records in their system, and so they essentially know, of the two of us sitting here, they would know how much time we would have left and what the calculation was based upon. And so they will often do that calculation for an inmate if it's an automatic retroactivity based upon a change in law. And so it really should be something that doesn't require either, well, it may require resentencing, but it need not necessarily require a lot of redoing of the original case. And so people incarcerated are represented. So you go to their counsel first and see if, in fact, they're available for that. But I would say if you have an interest in that, then a clinic project or a legal aid society project. Yeah.
Great. Over here.
Hi, I'm Felix Owusu, sorry law students. I'm also at the Kennedy School, so I apologize for hijacking your event. I'm a PhD student, and I'm also interested in criminal justice issues, policing, and also labor market outcomes for people who have been involved with the system. I guess my question is focused on sort of the racial disparities in the treatment that people have at different stages with the sort of justice process. I know that a lot of the issues that we've talked about here today are super important and are going to be very impactful, but I think when you talk to sort of everyday people, one thing that's very big in the sort of mind is that the criminal justice system does not work the same for everybody, even conditional on having the same laws or a specific law change. And so I wanted to ask, Do you think that that's a sort of first order concern in terms of ongoing changes that we're trying to look at, trying to address the racial aspects of it? And then do you think that there's any changes that could be coming in the pipeline that might be sort of mindful to that sort of aspect of it right now? Thank you.
Well, I think that's an ongoing issue in the criminal justice system, and I think that one of the things that we've seen over recent months with issues involving police and community relations, in particular, a lot of the cases that we've seen, because we're in a different society. You know, when I did the Louima case in the late 90s, we didn't have a cell phone video of what happened. We didn't have an audio of what happened, and there was a lot of initial disbelief of the actual allegation. And so, but now, because we essentially have a different technology available to so many people, we have in fact seen a number of instances of where people have suffered tremendously and lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement. And we see other instances also. They're tremendously difficult to look at. They're very painful to see, but they have frankly spurred a conversation and allowed those of us in law enforcement to have the dialogue and bring to the fore the fact that, you know, for a lot of people, this is new, but for a lot of people, it's not. You know, there are people who are saying that these types of incidents have been occurring for years. The disparities that are highlighted at the worst level, you know, by a shooting, for example, are similar to other disparities that you see. And in the past, you know, people would describe these issues, and they just weren't believed. You know, they would be brushed off because it wasn't the experience of the other person, or for whatever reason. And so that's been tremendously helpful in highlighting this issue. And so it's helpful to those of us who are looking at issues like, for example, implicit bias in policing, and looking at ways to bring that training into law enforcement training at all different levels, state, federal, and local, to be able to say, you know, you have situations where you can see that people are treated differently. And, you know, sometimes you can talk to people in a way and say, look, even if you may not view individuals as being treated differently, they view themselves as being treated differently, and their perception is their reality. And you have to deal with that also. You can get to it sideways sometimes. And so there is a lot of work actually being done in terms of structuring implicit bias training for law enforcement officers at all levels. And so I think that's going to be a very important tool for all of us who care about these issues.
That's great. Question here in the middle. I hope you're a law student.
Good afternoon. Bianca Tylick, 3L at Harvard Law School. My focus is corrections, specifically correctional management, and I've worked with several state and local departments of correction. And I think it's really interesting that your office is now interested in pursuing reentry and improving reentry. I'm wondering to what extent you're also considering alternatives to incarceration that make reentry unnecessary, which seems to be sort of in the realm of your office.
Well, that's a very important part of what we're focusing on as well. A lot of the preventive work that's been done has really been developed from the field up. You know, in my previous position as U.S. Attorney in Brooklyn, I spent a lot of time talking with my U.S. Attorney colleagues about how we could structure diversion programs or prevention programs for our offices. My office had a diversion program for certain types of crimes for years, in the sense that certain types of low-level offenses, you know, if the person would essentially either make restitution or agree to some type of drug treatment, we would defer their prosecution and then dismiss it. And so it was a small program, but the idea that we were thinking of when I came back into government in 2010 was how do we expand those programs? A lot of courts are thinking of exactly the same thing, and so you'll find diversion programs sponsored by different judges. You'll find drug treatment courts where if an individual undergoes intensive rehabilitation, their case may be reduced or dismissed as well. And so those are very, very important programs. My concern with them isn't that they exist. They're wonderful. My concern is that there's sort of a patchwork of them, and making sure that we, in fact, invest enough resources, because these are very resource-intensive programs, to make sure that we can, frankly, provide these types of programs throughout the whole court system at every level, and that it's not dependent upon your U.S. attorney caring about it and wanting to make it happen, or your chief judge, having an interest in that and wanting to make it happen, that it becomes institutionalized. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of courts making this a very, very functioning part of their court system. And we're seeing a lot of prosecutors' offices supporting that as well. When I was in Brooklyn, my counterpart at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office had a prevention and a reentry program they've had for the past 20 years. So the programs are there, and what we're trying to focus on is making sure that through our grant programs and also through highlighting them, we can spotlight them and we can provide them resources so that they can become permanent parts of the court system.
Turns out the Attorney General can stay for a few extra minutes so we can have a few extra questions. There's a hand up over here.
Attorney General, thank you for coming. Republicans have made clear that they want to include heightened mens rea for environmental and some other corporate crimes as part of the criminal justice reform package. And your Justice Department has publicly protested. But I'm curious if that's sort of a bright line for you that cannot be changed, or if that's something you're willing to negotiate on to get sentencing reductions.
Well, I think that the same question could be put to people who've raised it in a legislative context. I mean, I think that it has been raised. It has certainly by the House. It's been raised in a number of contexts that that's something that they'd like to see included, and we've expressed significant concerns with those, particularly for areas like environmental concerns, like you mentioned, areas of food safety, and frankly, many of our existing environmental statutes, as well as, to be frank, sort of the structure of our common law does not always require mens rea for there to be criminal culpability. Doesn't mean that there's strict liability for everything, obviously, but we do have a very, very strong tradition of not just the maxim that ignorance of the law is no excuse, but also conscious avoidance as a theory under which we can find liability. And certainly where there have been areas of strict liability, I think if you look at them, they are certainly situations that present such grave risks to safety that it is deemed that by society important enough to deal with activity that leads to those violations in a criminal way. And there's a host of statutes there. It doesn't mean that there aren't statutes out there that can't be made stronger in some sense, and we're happy to have that discussion, and we're happy to talk about ways in which we can figure out, what is your real focus here, what is your real concern here. But I do believe firmly, and it's the department's position and the administration's position, that for the vast majority of the statutes that we're talking about that are frankly, in many instances, one of the few bulwarks of protection for environmental matters, for food safety and the like, and for health safety and the like, it's very, very important to maintain that particular regulatory regime.
Over here.
Thank you, Attorney General Lynch. My name's Will Burgess. I'm a 3L. My question is, how do you manage criminal justice reform given the traditional primacy of state regulation and the patchwork of 50 different state criminal justice codes? And do you think the department should take a bigger role in specific cases and advancing reform across the country?
Well, I think the way that we're managing it is trying to make sure that at least at the federal level, that federal legislation reflects the views that prevention is important, reentry is important, and that we need to make sure that our system is as fair as possible. And we also recognize state efforts that frankly in many ways are ahead of the federal government in recognizing those interests and changing laws in those interests. In many ways the states have been very effective laboratories for criminal justice reform. So I think that we recognize it at the federal level. We also recognize and highlight it at the state level. In addition to statutory changes, there are a number of other policy issues that we think are very important for criminal justice reform, such as, for example, as you may know, that President Obama announced recently that the federal government will participate in what's called the Ban the Box initiative. That is to say, not initially asking, does someone have a criminal record? It will be an important part of evaluating an applicant, but often that's used to totally disqualify individuals. And so we're hoping that the federal government can lead the way for private employers to also take a similar step. My predecessor also had issued a call, which I have echoed and joined in, to many states to look at their own system of state laws that prevent people returning from prison from fully participating in the life of a citizen. For example, voting restrictions. Now that's where there is really a patchwork of laws as to when you regain the right to vote after typically a felony conviction. And so that is an area in which we try and lead, not just by example, but by also raising the issue and asking them to consider taking steps to eliminate barriers to that full participation in civic life. So it's both by dealing with our own statutory structure as well as pointing out and highlighting ways in which we think the states can also join in.
I think we have time for one last question. Right here.
Hello, my name is Edmund Small. I'm a sergeant from the New York City Police Department. Thank God that you're here again, and I was happy to know that Brooklyn is your second home. I patrol the 7-0 precinct where the Louima case did come out of.
Yes.
The question I had, though, was Officer Randolph Holder was killed in the line of duty in Harlem for a young man that was in the diversion program. He had 5 prior convictions. My question, though, is what safeguards or what safety nets would be in place for the citizens and law enforcement so that heinous crime wouldn't be transpired again?
Well, certainly that's a terrible loss. When any of our law enforcement officers are struck down, it's a loss not just to their departments but to the community, because people essentially have given their lives for the community that they're serving. I think that every diversion program is different, so I can't speak to the one that this young man was in. And so I'm not able to talk about that specific situation. What I can say is that the diversion programs tend to focus on people with addictions and try and get them into rehab. If that's not the situation, they tend to have extensive supervision and support in terms of getting them either employed or in school. But every program is different, so I'm not able to say that. I think that what you highlight, though, that not only is effective screening important, but also, as was part of the discussion that I had today with individuals who were about to return home and individuals who had, in fact, stayed, who had been out of prison for a while and had, in fact, had successful reentries, is there has to be that individual commitment by the individual. And one man this morning spoke really movingly about the fact that it took him several tries to get to that point, that he was released and he was back using narcotics in a matter of hours, and then he was released again from another time in incarceration and was back within 20 days, and that he had to really see that only he could turn his life around. And I think, sadly, a number of people, don't really have that particular bridge to health and wellness when they first get out. And sometimes the results are this tragedy that you mentioned. I think everyone tries to screen these programs as best they can. Everyone tries to make sure that they match the needs of the individual as best they can. And when there's a tragedy, it's a loss to us all.
Thank you so much, Loretta. It's such a pleasure to have you back here at Harvard Law School. Please join me in thanking the Attorney General.